Hello, welcome to the latest episode of You Are My Boro with myself, Dom Shaw, and Scott Wilson, both of the Northern Echo. Apologies for the slight delay between episodes. We said at the start of last week that because I was aware that there was going to be a brief break. What we didn't expect was in that brief break, Boro to sign two players, Chuba Akpom to leave. I suppose the one good thing about that, obviously, is the fact we don't really need to talk too much about that heavy defeat at Coventry, which is a week ago.
We can gloss over that, thankfully. And I tell you what, if I never have to go back to Coventry Stadium this season, that'll be enough. I feel like I've seen enough of that place now.
I mean, that's a weird stadium anyway. When you're in it, when we were there for the playoff game, and you walk from the press room to the stadium, it feels like you're in anything but a football stadium. It's more of a shopping complex, hotel.
Yeah, it makes me feel like you're in the.
It's lovely, isn't it?
It makes me feel like you're in the O2 at London. You know, when you go in the foyer of the O2 and you've got like the big place for the gigs and then a little bar here and a casino over there. And yeah, that's exactly what it's like. I mean, like you say, once you're in the seats, the actual ground itself is spot on. I think it's quite impressive. It's good, but it is a very strange kind of way into a football ground and everything else around it. And obviously, you would imagine from a Coventry fan point of view, not absolutely ideal because it's kind of stuck out on the middle of nowhere on the ring road, isn't it? I can't imagine you can walk there particularly easily from central Coventry. So yeah, but a disappointing afternoon for Boro. I mean, I think when I came away from that game, and I think when fans came away from that game, it felt like something had to happen. It felt like it was a team, that was having a rebuild, but that still had an awful lot of work to do. Now, at least now, a week further on, we've got a bit more clarity. We've obviously got two through the door. Chuba's gone. There's a line drawn under that. So, a lot of things that needed to happen have. And so hopefully, there can be a bit of a fresh start for Boro this weekend. The big disappointment, obviously, is that it's 2 games in and Boro are sat at the bottom of the table and are playing catch-up already. So, that's clearly not ideal, but at least some of the business has now been done, hasn't it?
Yeah, let's talk about that Akpom deal first then. 12.3 million euros rising to just over 14, Ajax confirmed in a statement. Like you said there, Boro needed clarity, didn't they, one way or another? And the beauty of it is, or the good thing about it is, it comes a couple of weeks before the deadline rather than a couple of days before it. Yeah. I mean, it's some move for Akpom, isn't it?
I think it's a deal that kind of suits everyone, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, I've seen some Boro fans kind of complaining about the price and pointing out the fact that Gyökeres went for 20 million this summer, and Akpom obviously outscored him in the Championship last year. But I think that given that Akpom's gone into the last year of his contract, given that we know that for all he had a fantastic season last year, he'd had 4 or 5 seasons before that where you wondered where on earth his career was going, whether it was at Boro, whether it was at Greece, whether it was back on Greece on loan. So, take all of that in the round. And I think to get 14 million euros for him, what's that, between 12, 13 million pound. I think that's pretty good going for Boro, really. I think Boro had to do that. And for, like you say, from Chuba's point of view, the chance to go and be the star man at Ajax is incredible, really. I mean, one of the great teams of Europe, for all that, their fortunes do go a bit up and down. And obviously they didn't win the Dutch league last year. They're still one of the iconic European teams and names, aren't they? So, yeah, what a chance for Akpom. And I think, in the end, a deal that Boro had to do. And it had become very obvious, certainly by last weekend at Coventry, that the die was cast. He wasn't going to be signing a new deal. He wasn't going to be staying at Boro. It needed a line drawn under it. And at least that's happened now.
And I mean, I know we've made this point, and we made this point on numerous occasions last year when he was scoring all the goals. But the idea of Akpom getting this move for that amount of money 12 months ago is just absolutely staggering. And like you say, the point, I think that's a good price. I think that's a good price for Boro, for a player who, let's be honest, has had one good season, and that's not us being wise after the event. We've made that point, haven't we, numerous times over the summer, that was kind of the balance that Boro had to strike, really. This isn't a player who scored 30 goals for 3 or 4 seasons. And a player who's had one good, excellent season, going into the last year of his contract, like you say, when it became pretty clear really that he was going to go, I agree. I think it suits all parties. I mean, the obvious caveat there is that's if Boro replace him, and he's going to need some replacing. That we'll get onto that. But I think the other thing is, you see fans of all clubs, not just Boro, talking about the models of Brighton and Brentford, and we want to do what Brighton and Brentford do. Well, part of the beauty of the success of clubs like Brighton and Brentford is they know when to sell players. Now, I know this is slightly different because Boro's hand was forced to an extent with the contract situation. But if you look over the course of last year, Boro struck at the right time to get a deal for Jed Spence last summer. When you look at what's happened to him since. Marcus Tavernier, I know obviously Tav has best years ahead of him and he had a good year at Bournemouth, but still seemed a good price at the time. And we now know that Boro had Hayden Hackney coming through, although that happened, that wouldn't have happened obviously without the managerial change. And now Akpom as well. The key is, and where Brighton and Brentford and other clubs like that have been hugely successful is they've found replacements, haven't they? And they've always managed to find the next player. And that's the challenge for Boro, isn't it? When you look at the forward line, we're going to talk about the players who've come in, but it looks like a good deal. It looks like a deal that suits all parties, but now you need to replace Akpom and find a system that works in that forward line again.
Yeah, so, I mean, two things on that. One is, in an ideal circuit, you talk about Brighton and Brentford then, and you make some really good points, I think. And in an ideal circumstance, a club shouldn't be getting into a scenario where their key player is going into the last year of their contract not tied down and with their future uncertain. Where I think you've got to give Boro a pass on this, though, is at no stage prior to probably Christmas onwards would you have ever conceived of giving Chuba Akpom a new long-term contract or what he was on, because it just was unthinkable up until Carrick arrived and his fortunes pretty much changed at a stroke. So, whereas some clubs, and Boro have been guilty of this in the past, have rightly been criticised for not getting themselves sorted and getting key players tied down. I don't think you can level that at Boro this time just because of Chuba's past record before last season. Now, moving forward, yeah, you're absolutely right. What do they do now? I mean, you look at it and think, yes, Lath's come in and we'll talk about him in a second, but that really was to replace Archer, who left at the end of last season as a number 9. So Chuba's departures left a whole new gap at number 10. Surely they have to bring in someone and someone with a certain degree of pedigree to replace him. Now, that question was put to Michael Carrick yesterday at his press conference. It was put to him actually by Rob Law from BBC Tees. And Carrick's answer was fairly non-committal. He kind of said, look, the window's open. We're always kind of looking at things right up until the end of the window. If there's something that comes up and when we feel it's right for the club, we'll go for it. But we have options in the forward line. We have players there who can do different things in different roles. Replacing Chuba Akpom is not simply a case of replacing like for like, because it's really hard to do that. You might have to do things a little bit differently now he's not in the side. So there's a lot there, isn't there? I mean, he didn't say, no, we're not going to replace Chuba Akpom, but he certainly didn't say we need that signing. Now, that's not really Carrick's style. And to be fair, he's not really done that all summer. So, maybe there is talks going on and maybe there are targets and options there and things in the pipeline, but it doesn't sound definitive as of yet. And that would be a worry, I think, because they need, Boro need someone in that key creative attacker midfield role now, assuming that they're going to continue playing the formation that Carrick's played pretty much from day one.
Yeah, I mean, it feels to me, even before the arrival of Lath, you looked and felt Boro probably needed 2 strikers, especially if Josh Coburn's going to go on loan, which is likely, isn't it? So it still feels to me like Boro need another striker on top of Lath. Oh, that's a huge burden to put on him, isn't it? And Akpom on top of that surely needs replacing. Now, Boro have players who can play at number 10, don't they? I suspect, we haven't seen it yet, but I suspect Rodgers could play there. Gilbert could play there. I'm sure Riley Riley McGree could move inside. We've seen Fitz play there, although it doesn't.
Has obviously done it not to great effect, but can. Yeah, so you're right. There are
Diallo can play there, but it's a huge. That's a big ask and a big gamble, isn't it? To lose your best player and to try and replace him. I'd be amazed if Boro didn't bring in another player. Now it might be that I'm sitting there. I feel like Boro still need another striker and a number 10. It might be that they bring in someone who can do both, who's a number 10 but can also play as more of a line leader, and then that gives Carrick options because we know he's got Crooks who can play up front. Obviously, we've seen Rodgers play up there. He can move Force back up there, although still feels like if he was going to do that, he'd have done it in the last few weeks when he hasn't actually had an out-and-out striker. But I think I'd be staggered if another forward, whether that's a striker, but even a direct replacement, I'd be staggered if an Akpom replacement didn't come in.
Yeah, I completely agree. It feels, way too light to be going in with what they've got. Like you say, not necessarily numerically, because, there are players there. And as Carrick rightly says, there's players who probably could play as a 9 if push, could play as a 10, could play wide if needs be. But, what you don't have is that one player who you feel is, absolutely ready to step up and not necessarily replace the goals Chuba brought last season, but be that focal point of the attack, be that key creator.
Talisman, really.
Yeah, be the man who's going to take the mantle and score, but also supply things, set things up, make the runs that Chuba was making last season. I don't see that player in the squad at the moment, so I think there definitely is a need to bring him in. Now, like everything, the headline is that Boro have sold Chuba Akpom for 14 million euros. As we know from previous deals, that doesn't translate in having 14 million euros there to be able to spend on a replacement because it will be a staggered deal. We know that 2 million of that is incentivized. As I say, the payments will almost certainly be spread out pretty much over the course of the contract, which I think was 5 years, I'm right in saying. So, Boro don't have 14 million in their back pocket to go out and sign someone, but there will be money there. There has to be money there. And, it feels like there definitely needs to be another forward comes in before the end of the month. I think there will be.
Yeah, I agree. On the one who has come in then, Latte Lath, obviously you've covered that story this week while I've been away. He comes in as the line leading striker that clearly Boro have needed since Cameron Archer headed back to Aston Villa last summer. What do you know about Lath and what do you think he'll offer Boro?
So, in terms of what do we know, his background is very interesting because he born in the Ivory Coast. Like a lot of kind of talented African players, was on the kind of radar of a whole host of European scouts. Went to Atalanta as a teenager. I think he was about 15 when he went over there. Started really brightly. Made his debut for Atalanta in the Coppa Italia. I think it was either 16 or 17. Scored against Juventus as a teenager. And then for whatever reason, just never progressed into Atlanta's senior setup. Went out on a whole host of loans. I think it was 6 different loans in the Italian lower leagues in Serie B and C to various different levels of effect. And then last season went to the Swiss top flight with St. Gallen and had by far and away his best season in terms of goal scoring, assists and number of games played. So, I think that season Boro will feel has been the making of him and got him to a position where he's ready to play in the Championship. Time will tell, won't it, whether their judgment's correct or not. I mean, in terms of what he is, it was interesting. The club did an interview with him the day after he arrived, and he kind of couldn't get out there quickly enough that he sees himself as a number 9. Yes, he can play wide. Yes, he can do this, but I am a number 9, he said. I am here to score goals. So that, let's see how that works out. I mean, that's how he's going to be used. He will be the central striker. He's played for Atalanta pretty much right through pre-season, or at least he's been in training with them all the way through pre-season. I think we'll get onto the team for the Huddersfield game in a minute. I have a feeling that Carrick might well pitch both the new signings straight in on Saturday, because I I think he'll feel that, ready to do that. And like we say, it's not as if the players who have been filling those roles have been pulling up trees in either of the 2 games so far. So I think we'll probably get an early sight of him on Saturday and an early chance to look at what he's capable of. But, he's probably actually, from what you hear from him, from the size and the physical nature of him, from the little bits that you see on YouTube of the way that he's been playing, he's probably actually more of a natural number 9 than Archer was in terms of, being an out and out number 9. So I think that'll be interesting to see.
And Lukas Engels, I mean, left back was clearly the other priority area, wasn't it? Hayden Coulson come in, obviously played pre-season, played the start of the season. We've talked in the past, haven't we, about kind of what made Coulson's job all the more difficult was he was being judged against the league's best left back, one of the league's best attackers and creative forces last season. But the same will be said for Engels, that the huge shoes to fill, aren't they?
Yes, they are. But I thought it was interesting that both with Engel, his first interview himself, and what Michael Carrick was saying at his press conference yesterday, the focus from right the way through really around this has been he is an attack-minded fullback. He actually started his career as a winger. He was a winger for most of his time before he went to Silkeborg about, where are we now? Just over 2 years ago. And it's really only during his time at Silkeborg where he's gone from being a left winger to a left wing back, then a left back. He's clearly someone who likes to get on the front foot, create, get assists, deliver crosses, etc., etc. Now, the beauty with Giles last season, as we alluded to on a few of these vids, was that he did all that, but actually he didn't get undone defensively that much either. Yes, defensively might have been the weaker part of his game, but there weren't too many games where you were looking at Giles and thinking, goodness me, he's had a right going over defensively there. 1 or 2 over the course of the season, maybe. So Engel is going to have to prove that he can get that side of his game right in the Championship, because for all that he'll be bombing forward, he's still going to be in a 4-man defence. Carrick's not going to go at 5 at the back. He's going to be playing as a left back. So he's going to have to prove that he can defend in the Championship. But from what you hear from him and from what you hear from Boro, both on the record and off the record, I think there's an excitement about what he can do going forward. And so I think they feel that he'll be the closest possible thing to starting to deliver so much of what Giles was delivering for Boro last season. Whether it's McNair or Smith at right back, that immediately should provide a bit more balance to this Boro team, because at least you'll have an attacking threat down one of those flanks when, for all that Coulson has tried to get forward in the first 2 league games, there hasn't been anything like the threat from wide that there was last season. Hopefully Engel will help to remedy that. Yeah,
and I think what's made life even more difficult for Coulson is last year we saw how it worked in that Giles had the kind of license to bomb on, and Smith, who was clearly more defensively minded, and then took in, and it almost became a back 3. Whereas because McNair has had to play at right back because of Smith and Dyke Steele's injury, it's just changed the dynamic completely, hasn't it? And yes. I think the other thing as well is Giles and McGree had such a good understanding down that left side, didn't they, last season? Now I know obviously Carrick changed it at Coventry and McGree was dropped, but I still think most weeks, if you're picking Boro's best team, McGree starts on that left side, and if Engel and McGree can strike up a relationship, anything like Giles and McGree did last season, then that's a real boost, because I thought they were a real force down that side. They just seemed to have an understanding, didn't they? It just worked.
Yeah, they did, and I think McGree is a better fit for an attack-minded fullback than probably Silvera will be. I mean, Silvera obviously came in at Coventry and has looked exciting in pre-season, but probably suits playing with a defensive-minded fullback, because he's not necessarily going to slot back and drop in if the fullback is really bombing on. Now, McGree did that last season, and like you say, his positional awareness, as much as anything, allowed Giles to pretty much attack with abandon. So yeah, I agree. I think Silvera will undoubtedly have a big role to play this season and looks a really exciting prospect. But if Engel is the type of player that we think he is, then I suspect McGree will be there to dovetail with him. Yeah.
Couple of weeks to go then till the deadline. What do we reckon Boro are going to be looking for and at? We've obviously talked about up front, whether bringing a striker and a number 10 or someone who can do a bit of both. The only other position really that we've talked about and I've seen players linked this week is in midfield. Do you still think maybe one light there?
Yeah. I mean, there was the talk, wasn't there, of a right back with Smith and Dijksteel out, but I can kind of see Carrick's thinking that actually, as long as they get back reasonably soon, then you've actually got 3 right backs if McNair's can slot in there as well. So you don't really need a 4th, do you? So I can kind of see that, although, it would have been nice to have another alternative option at the moment, I think. But yeah, I think central midfield is the area because as we've seen when Howson's been, just easing his way back at the start of the season, it's had to be Hackney and Barlaser because there's not really anybody else, is there? So, if one of them was to be out for a real long-term spell, then I think you would want someone else to provide an option and a greater degree of security in there. So yeah, they would be my guesses. Like we've been saying, an attack-minded player, primarily to replace Akpom, but potentially that can also play as a 9 and a central midfielder, probably on loan. They would be my 2 guesses. Now, the wild card is if a Premier League loan came in the last week. If Man United got in touch with them and said, look, does Michael Carrick fancy one of our youngsters? There's 7 here that we want to get out on the last week. That's a one extra, isn't it? That's a nice thing to have rather than something at this stage you need. But I think that's a possibility because as we saw last season, Boro were pretty adept, to be fair to them, at moving quite quickly in that last week in January to get what they did. And so I think if an appealing Premier League loan became available in that last week, kind of wherever it is on the pitch, really, I think Boro would be interested and think, okay, well, we can top up with that. So that's one to watch. But clearly, the number 10, you would think ideally you'd want the permanent in there, wouldn't you?
And just on the subject of loans, obviously we've talked at length about Aaron Ramsey and Cameron Archer, and earlier in the summer, Unai Emery had said pretty firmly, really, that he planned to keep Cameron Archer around. But now there's strong suggestions that Villa would be willing to cash in and do what reportedly they've done with the Aaron Ramsey deal and insert a buyback clause. It'd be a surprise, I think, if they cashed in on Archer permanently. You would imagine there'd be Premier League clubs who'd be willing to take him on loan for a season. But
yeah,
I suppose
I think it would be a surprise with Villa. As we've said all the way through, with Villa having Conference League, I'm surprised that that Archer's not part of that equation because you watch West Ham in that Conference League last season, and with the greatest will in the world, the group stage is probably about on a par with the Championship. So Archer, I think, could quite happily start for Villa in all of those group games if he wanted to rest, say, Ollie Watkins. But yeah, the noises are that he is going to be going, which I do find quite surprising. Sheffield United, you would think, probably a lot of the noises when they didn't go in for Akpom was, well, Archer's the one they're now looking at. So could probably see that.
Just before we talk about Huddersfield, you mentioned there about midfield, and we've talked about number 10. Martin Piero, we still probably know, we don't probably know much more about Piero and his makeup in this Boro team than we did when he came back. Does an exit for Piero still make sense this summer if the opportunity presents itself? Because he's played more as a number 10, but games have passed him by.
Yeah.
If Carrick saw him as a midfielder, would he have tried him there? Would he have used him there?
I think we have learned a little bit more than when he first came. And I think what we've learned is that he's not going to be a regular starter in Michael Carrick's Boro team. I think if that was going to happen, we would have seen a lot more of him. He would have been a lot more prominent. He would have been influencing games when he has had the chance more. And he would have been on in some way, shape or form in the first 2 league games. I think the fact that he is really no higher up the pecking order now than when he first came back, or even when he was here under Wilder, says to me that he's not going to break in and be a key figure in this Boro team this season. So with that in mind, I think Boro probably will look to move him on again. Yeah, whether that be permanent in an ideal world or even, another loan if it has to be that. I don't see him figuring prominently in a Michael Carrick Boro team. I think if that was going to happen, he'd be a lot further down the line with it than he clearly is at the minute. So he's one that I'd be fairly surprised if he was still here after the end of the transfer window, put it like that.
Huddersfield then, Neil Warnock. It feels, even at this early stage, like a big game.
It does. And I mean, that is just a kind of natural consequence of having lost your opening 2 league matches. Now, there's been mitigating factors in both of those, namely that Boro have come up against teams that, are quite rate. I think they'll both probably be in and around the playoff mix come the end of the season. The signings obviously hadn't come through the door. So, yes, there are excuses. But the reality is that Boro are 24th in the table, albeit only after 2 matches, but with no points and no goals. They now come up against a side at home that, for all Neil Warnock's done great things, for all they rallied really well in that last season, you would fully expect Huddersfield to be finishing in the bottom third of the table this season, if not scrapping against relegation again. So, on paper, this is the ideal opportunity for Boro to get that first win on the board and really kickstart things. Hopefully that's what happens. If it doesn't, and it becomes 0 points or 1 point from 3 games, then you're getting a bit further down the line of where this is becoming a problem now. You know what I mean? So I think it is. I think it is a big game because the Akpom's situation is resolved. There's positivity with the 2 new signings. Like I say, I think they might both well start. I think Engel will certainly start because he's been playing for Silkeborg in competitive matches. So I think he will definitely start. Latte, slightly less certain, but I suspect he will. So, there'll be a bit of excitement. There'll be a feel-good factor. It's a chance to draw a line under, what has been a pretty poor start to the season so far and really get things going. And I think Boro will do that, in fairness. I think Boro will have too much for Huddersfield. You were obviously there when they beat them in the Cup. Now, Carrick was saying yesterday, the styles of the 2 teams won't change very much, but clearly the personnel will, and it's just different because it's a championship game. I take all that in board, but I still think fundamentally Middlesbrough are a better side than Huddersfield, and all things being equal, should win the game tomorrow.
The cup game there last week, a couple of weeks ago, and the league game last season, which is still remarkable, really, to think how Boro imploded in that 10-minute spell, because the first half was just a training game. But although completely different teams, in that Huddersfield had made 10 changes for that cup game a week ago, the way the game played out was very similar, in that Huddersfield were just deep and just out, basically, come on then, pick the lock. Could try and break us down. In both games, Boro's centre-halves were at various stages in the middle of Huddersfield's half, with all players in front of them, just the movement, and the challenge is to break them down. It feels like one of those games. I know, cliche straight away, but it's that first goal, isn't it? It feels like if Boro get that first goal, I can't see anything other than a convincing win. But you know what you're going to get from, Warnock's going to come to frustrate and he'll be unapologetic about that, won't he? He won't try and do anything other than that. He'll be loyal and to make life difficult for Boro. We know exactly what to expect.
And if the game is like that, which I'm like you, I fully suspect it will be, then I think if Latte starts, it'll be interesting to see who Carrick plays as the 10. I've gone for Rodgers in that team just because I think that's where ultimately he will end up. You could play Crooks there again, but I'm not sure he's got the finesse or the real creative vision if Huddersfield are effectively just stringing 2 ranks of 4 pretty much in and around the edge of their 18-yard box. Rodgers, we don't really know. We saw little bits in the Coventry game that, he can run from deep at players with the ball and cause a problem. quite what he's like in a tight, confined space of picking a pass will be interesting. Maybe McGree there will be an option in a game like this. Carrick hasn't really played him there that much, and yet I think in terms of, energy and passing ability, McGree probably might well be at the minute the best bet they've got as a 10, but I do wonder if he'll play Rodgers there. But whoever's there, I suspect will be important tomorrow because, like you say, I think there'll be an awful lot of defenders in and around that Huddersfield 18-yard box that you're going to have to pick your way through.
An awful lot's changed. Huddersfield, it was 0-0, wasn't it, when Huddersfield came to Boro last season?
Yeah, that was Leo, wasn't it?
Yeah, when both teams were bottom and second bottom. I think Mark Fotheringham was in charge at Huddersfield at the time. Yeah. At that stage, Huddersfield, when Warnock went in, I said at the time it felt like Warnock's biggest challenge, and I still think the way that he managed to keep them up and to keep them up comfortably really was a staggering achievement. Do you think he'll get a good reception? It's his first return to Riverside tomorrow. Boro fans were having some fun with him last week.
Yes.
Warnock give us a wave. Warnock wants to score, but then at full time, he was straight over to them. Applause. It's his first return to Riverside. It's kind of classic Warnock in his pre-match presser this week. But when all the dust settles and he gets down there pitch side, you expect him to get a good reception?
I think he will. I think he will when he first goes out, and I think he will at the end of the game once everything's done and dusted, and he applauds the fans. Now, obviously, what happens in the 90 minutes will be dependent a bit on the result. I think if Boro are winning, there'll probably be a bit of Warnock wants to score when he's out there, and Warnock give us a wave. If they're getting beat, then I would imagine there'll be a fair bit of chuntering because he'll probably be in the referee's ear. No doubt Huddersfield will be time wasted and there'll be 25 minutes of added time or something ridiculous like that, and it'll all get a bit fractious. But no, I expect at the start and the end of the game that he'll get a really good reception. And he deserves it because, he kept Boro up, not quite in as dire straits as Huddersfield were in last season, but in pretty blooming dire straits that first season when he came in, and then obviously guiding them through the whole COVID thing, and had a really tight relationship with the fans. Now, I think there's a lot of respect for what he did with Boro.
And I think, I know he laps up the idea of being the pantomime villain, doesn't he? And he loves going to places and getting the stick. But he talked at length, didn't he, about when he was on here with us, about how much the reception he got when he came back to the town hall as part of his tour. And he was blown away by the reception there and almost told how he was a bit surprised by it, really. So although Warnock will be Warnock, it'd mean a lot to him, wouldn't it, if he gets a good reception there?
Yeah, I think he'd be hurt if he didn't. And I think he'd be right to be hurt if he didn't, because, for all the reasons I outlined before, I think he definitely deserves it. And I think Boro fans know that, and I think they see that. And, he's a likeable character, isn't he? Especially when he's been with your club. I understand why if he's just someone who's constantly wound up your club, he can get up people's kind of get their backs up. But no, Boro fans have to have a lot of admiration and respect for the job Neil Warnock did while in charge at the Riverside, and I'm sure he'll get a good reception.
Do you think he'll leave disappointed? What are you going prediction?
Yeah, I do. I do think Boro will win. I take on board, everything you've said about Huddersfield just, effectively trying to spoil and keep it tight. But I think Boro will just have too much for them. I'd like to see Isaiah Jones play because I think it's important that they've got some kind of a wide threat. He didn't have a great game against Coventry, really, but I think he's a better bet tomorrow than Force if Huddersfield are just going to sit back and invite Boro on. So I think Boro will win. I think 3-0. I think it might be, a result and a performance that genuinely does get the season up and running a bit. I hope I'm right. Yeah,
I agree. I think if Boro can get that first goal, especially in the first half, I agree. I could see a 2 or 3-0 win. He is hoping. Well, I'm there tomorrow, so we'll have all the build-up on the blog, followed by obviously all the reaction and analysis over the course of the weekend. And then we'll be back next week. Scott's away, but I'll be back next week with a video with a special guest or two over the next couple of weeks to discuss all things Boro and the games and transfers in the lead up to the deadline, but also some interviews with guests as well. So stick with us. As we say, obviously, if you watch on YouTube, then subscribe. And leave a comment and get in touch. If you listen on podcasts, then obviously rate and leave a review as well. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Enjoy the game on Saturday and enjoy your weekend.